Have you ever experienced entering a space and immediately sensing the profound impact of someone's presence, even before they uttered a single word? There's a certain quality of stillness, an arresting calm that captures attention more effectively than any elaborate speech. It's a tranquility that can unsettle the restless, a silence that feels less like an absence and more like a subtle form of command or dominion. This potent effect is something Niccolò Machiavelli deeply understood. He grasped the strategic art of abstaining from argument, recognizing that every time you engage in a dispute, you are essentially stepping onto a contested field you did not choose to enter. You find yourself fighting a conflict you did not initiate, and in doing so, you relinquish something far more precious than the specific point of contention itself. You surrender your frame, your composure, your silent advantage. Machiavelli observed that true influence doesn't need to announce itself or plead for recognition. It operates with subtle movement and stillness, drawing others into its orbit while meticulously avoiding exposure to their emotional volatility or chaotic energy. Today, we delve into the profound strategic power inherent in refusing to argue. Far from being a sign of weakness, this deliberate restraint is a powerful tool that safeguards your position, enhances your perception, and ultimately distinguishes you in a world saturated with noise. Stay with us, as understanding this principle holds the potential to transform not only how you navigate disagreements but also how you project your influence in a world that seems perpetually inclined towards shouting. Silence often compels the ego to reveal itself. Let's explore why engaging in arguments is almost invariably a detrimental endeavor, especially when the goal is to cultivate genuine power and influence. Niccolò Machiavelli, that astute architect of political strategy, grasped a fundamental truth that many still struggle to comprehend. In the delicate interplay of power dynamics today, influence is not generated by loudness or contention, it is shaped by perception. Within the subtle, often invisible, game of authority, the individual who frequently argues is the one who inadvertently exposes their vulnerabilities. Why is this the case? Because arguments primarily appeal to rational thought, yet human beings are overwhelmingly driven by the powerful forces of ego, pride, and deep-seated emotions. As the Stoics well knew, external events don't disturb us, our judgments about them do. The act of arguing itself reveals a critical internal state, that you are emotionally invested, that you can be easily provoked, that you feel a need to validate or assert yourself. And to those few who understand the quiet language of power, that very need is the clearest indicator of susceptibility. What truly matters is not the logical coherence or strength of your points, but the intrinsic weakness you betray the precise moment you step into the volatile arena of verbal confrontation. Machiavelli recognized this truth. So too did numerous influential thinkers who followed, from Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist, to the strategic minds of our contemporary era. They all echo a consistent, enduring principle: avoid direct argument. Instead, exert influence from a considered distance. Command through subtle implication and skillful suggestion. Led by shaping perception, not through head-on collision or dispute. Because when you engage in argument, you do not merely fail to persuade the other party, you often succeed only in entrenching them more deeply within their existing beliefs. Every word you deploy, intended as a logical weapon, functions instead like a shovel, assisting them in digging deeper into the fortified positions of their pride and preconceived notions. Grasp this fundamental psychological reality. The more intensely you attempt to alter someone's perspective through direct challenge, the greater their resistance will become. This opposition arises not necessarily because your points are flawed, but because their ego has been directly confronted and challenged. And the ego, that formidable internal guardian, will almost always fight more fiercely and irrationally than pure logic ever could. Arguments breed antagonism and foster animosity. They cultivate bitterness and lingering resentment. Engaging in arguments makes you appear trivial, overly reactive, and easily agitated or disturbed. But silence cultivates an aura of mystery. And mystery is a potent form of power. When you remain unperturbed, when you decline to wade into the emotional mire or rhetorical skirmishes that others attempt to draw you into, you signal something far more significant, that you reside above the petty compulsion for external validation, that you cannot be manipulated or baited, that your internal peace and sovereignty are inviolable. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus wisely advised in his Enchiridion, it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. When we are hindered, or disturbed, or grieved, let us never attribute it to others, but to ourselves, that is, to our own judgments. Your refusal to argue demonstrates mastery over these disruptive judgments. This is precisely why truly powerful individuals seldom feel compelled to justify or explain themselves incessantly. They exert influence through the weight of their presence, not through ceaseless persuasion. They sow ideas like seeds, cultivating growth through suggestion rather than wielding them like blunt hammers of argument. They move others and shape outcomes without needing to raise their voices or engage in heated exchanges. Both Machiavelli, in his analysis of effective rulership, and the Stoics, in their pursuit of inner virtue and resilience, understood that authentic command stems from deliberate restraint, not from impulsive reaction. On the grand stage of life's interactions, the individual who maintains their composure and chooses strategic silence compels others to reveal their intentions and strategies, often forcing them to act with diminished information, essentially playing their hand blindly. And that lack of clarity on their part is a significant advantage for the silent observer. Ultimately, the person who achieves mastery over their tongue also masters their destiny. Because silence possesses an eloquence that speaks volumes, while arguments merely expose vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Arguments serve only to inflate and feed the ego, both your own and the other person's. Silence, conversely, quietly accumulates and reinforces your power. Let's consider the hidden, often overlooked, cost of arguing, a cost that Niccolò Machiavelli meticulously analyzed and that even the Stoic philosophers apprehended with piercing clarity in their pursuit of wisdom. The very instant you engage in an argument with another person, you are effectively stepping onto their chosen ground. You are implicitly acknowledging the validity of their frame of reference, their narrative, their chosen emotional hook. And regardless of how logically impeccable your position may be, the moment you take the bait and engage, you have already forfeited something far more significant than the specific point of contention. You have relinquished the protective cloak of mystery that previously enveloped you. When you argue, you expose your inner landscape. You reveal your psychological boundaries, where your patience wears thin, where your ego is sensitive and flares up, where your composure can be breached and disturbed. And even if you manage to win the argument in terms of logic, you have fundamentally lowered yourself into the volatile arena of emotional combat, a domain where perception and feeling almost invariably overpower reasoned logic. The individual who steadfastly refuses to argue, by contrast, becomes perceived as a fortress seemingly without accessible doors, unreadable, unshakable, frustratingly out of reach to manipulation. Machiavelli, in his pragmatic analysis of power, knew this truth. And the Stoics, centuries before him, understood the profound strength derived from cultivating inner resilience and detachment from external disturbances. True strength resides not in being the loudest or most insistent voice in the room, but in possessing the most unassailable and untouchable presence. Silence, when deployed with wisdom and intent, is not passive inaction, it functions as a potent mirror. It forces the other person to confront their own words, their own underlying pride, their own insistent demand for validation or control. And within that void of unanswered contention, their own position often begins to falter or crumble. This is because most people engaged in an argument are not genuinely seeking objective truth, they are seeking control. They seek to pull you into their own emotional chaos and measure their own perceived strength against your reaction. But when you refuse to take that step forward, when you remain anchored and undisturbed, they are left flailing against a void, expending their energy pointlessly against a presence they cannot destabilize or shake. As Epictetus taught, no man is free who is not a master of himself. By remaining silent, you demonstrate precisely this mastery, denying them the external control they seek. Understand this crucial dynamic. Power does not emanate from having the final word in a discourse. True power flows from needing no words at all to affirm your position or worth. The individual who speaks sparingly but observes keenly holds an inherent advantage that cannot be easily seized or neutralized. This is because no one can definitively ascertain where they stand, how they truly feel, or what their next calculated action might be. They become an enigma no one can definitively answer, a strategic challenge no one can easily solve. And that deliberate mystery, that carefully guarded reserve and silence, serves as an armor far more impenetrable than any argument ever constructed. Ultimately, the person who chooses not to argue is not defeated, not exposed, and not weakened. They simply remain unshakable and firmly in command, while others squander their vital energy attempting to provoke a figure who seems impervious to their attacks, akin to trying to grapple with a ghost. Silence, therefore, is a formidable protector of power. Let's examine why silence stands as one of the most strategically powerful shields you can possibly wield, a principle understood deeply by both Niccolò Machiavelli and the ancient Stoics. In The Prince, Machiavelli famously advised a ruler to cultivate the appearance of mercy, faithfulness, humaneness, uprightness, and piety, while being prepared to act in direct contradiction to these virtues if political necessity demanded it. Why this emphasis on appearance? Because perception itself is a weapon, and engaging in argument is often the crucial slip that exposes the underlying reality, stripping away the carefully constructed facade. To argue is to voluntarily lower your guard, to remove the mask. It exposes raw emotion, reveals insecurity, lays bare your biases. It invites detailed scrutiny, opens pathways to your weaknesses, and unveils vulnerabilities that opponents can and will exploit, whether in legal battles, complex negotiations, political maneuvering, or the delicate currents of human relationships. Those who authentically hold positions of significant power seldom, if ever, engage in petty arguments or protracted disputes. They make carefully weighed statements. They drop subtle hints or carefully placed suggestions. And more often than not, they allow silence to stretch and fill the space far longer than the noise of contention ever could. Because words, no matter how precisely chosen or articulated, can always be twisted, reinterpreted, or weaponized against you in a different context. But silence remains essentially untouchable. It offers nothing tangible for an opponent to seize upon, nothing for resentment to sharpen its claws against. Seneca, a leading Stoic figure, warned about the destructive nature of anger and the need for self-control on anger. The best way to deal with anger is to prevent it. Train yourself to be calm when provoked. This Stoic discipline directly supports the strategic Machiavellian advantage of remaining outwardly undisturbed. Machiavelli grasped a deeper, often uncomfortable, truth about human psychology. People may eventually forget the exact words you used in a conflict, but they will almost never forget how you made them feel. Winning an argument on purely logical grounds might grant you a momentary rhetorical victory, but it also leaves the other party feeling humiliated, cornered, and profoundly resentful. And resentment is not an emotion that dissipates easily or quietly. It festers, it plots patiently, it grows into a fertile ground for future opposition or even outright rebellion. In leadership contexts, this truth is even more acutely felt. The manager who constantly argues with their team erodes their inherent authority and respect. The executive who feels compelled to defend every single decision breeds doubt and encourages dissent. But the leader who listens more attentively than they speak, who acts decisively without needing to loudly announce or justify every move, who influences through quiet confidence, that leader becomes a pillar of perceived strength, stable, unshakable, trusted not primarily because of convincing rhetoric, but because of the undeniable weight and consistency of their presence and actions. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up, if thou wilt ever dig. A leader arguing lacks this inward focus. A silent, decisive leader acts from it. Observe closely the most accomplished diplomats, the most effective negotiators in history, the military generals who masterfully shifted the tides of conflict. They did not squander their precious strategic energy on arguing or justifying. They maneuvered with precision. They observed and absorbed information patiently. They allowed their adversaries to exhaust themselves explaining, defending, and reacting, while they themselves maintained a state of calm composure, unwavering patience, and silently gathered leverage. And when they eventually chose to act, they did so with calculated precision, driven by strategy, not by impulsive passion. They understood that in the authentic game of influence, the person making the most noise is rarely the most powerful. The most powerful is the one whose intentions you cannot read, the one who makes no extravagant promises yet commands loyalty and respect without needing to demand it. Ultimately, your silence is not an empty space, it is your strongest strategic position, your highest form of self-discipline, and the subtle, invisible hand that shapes outcomes without ever exposing itself to the vulnerability of direct attack or contention. Silence possesses the inherent ability to outsmart chaotic situations. Let's delve deeper into why silence, in stark contrast to argument, constitutes the authentic language of power, and how both Niccolò Machiavelli and the Stoics recognized that achieving mastery over one's emotions was the indispensable first step toward mastering external outcomes. When you argue, when you impulsively rush to defend your position, to ensure you are understood, or to forcefully prove a point, you are, often unconsciously, revealing a truth far more profound than your spoken words. You are making a subtle plea. You are essentially saying, "Please, I implore you, see things my way." But why should you possess such a desperate need for external validation? Why should your perspective need to be proclaimed from the rooftops if its inherent truth and strength are genuinely self-evident and unshakable? Marcus Aurelius, the revered Roman emperor and a central figure of late Stoicism, would likely have regarded this lesson with a knowing nod. He famously penned in his Meditations, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Centuries later, Machiavelli, stripping this sentiment of its moral framework, presented it as pure, unadulterated strategy. If your position is intrinsically strong, you do not need to argue for it, you simply act upon it. You do not need to defend yourself rhetorically, you demonstrate your truth through undeniable action or presence. True power possesses an inherent self-sufficiency. It requires no external validation, no applause from onlookers, no emotional sparring match to confirm its worth. It simply exists. Arguing, therefore, becomes a form of veiled insecurity. It stems from the underlying fear that without constant explanation or justification, you will be dismissed or undervalued. It is born of the desperation to anchor your sense of worth in the constantly shifting and unreliable opinions of others. Yet, the individual who truly wields authentic power understands this dynamic intimately. They know that approval is a fleeting and unreliable currency, and that genuine influence flows not from being fully understood by everyone, but from maintaining a state of being fundamentally unmoved and unperturbed by external pressures or opinions. The most composed individual is not feared because they are outwardly aggressive or confrontational. They are respected, even feared in a strategic sense, because they appear immune to manipulation or provocation. You cannot easily bait them, you cannot provoke them into a foolish emotional outburst or strategic exposure. They do not strive to win the room through sheer force of personality or argument, they become the center of gravity in the room through their self-contained stillness. Machiavelli's undeniable brilliance lay not in inventing the complexities of human nature, but in laying them bare with unflinching clarity, in demonstrating precisely how strategic action, not sentiment or emotional display, is the primary driver of the world's affairs. And when it came to the subject of argument, his clarity was absolute and ruthless, persuasion is often the domain of those who lack inherent power. True influence belongs to the strategically minded. Because the instant you engage in an argument, you effectively relinquish your commanding position. You step into the other person's chosen arena, under their often chaotic rules, effectively dancing to the disorienting rhythm they set. But when you maintain your silence, when you observe keenly, when you strategically withhold your immediate reaction or opinion, you remain above the fray, untouched by the immediate chaos. You allow others to exhaust their energy and reveal their hand, while you meticulously conserve your force and clarity for the moment that genuinely matters, the moment of decisive, impactful action. In contemporary life, this principle manifests in countless situations. In professional settings, the individual who habitually argues points in meetings or dispatches lengthy, emotionally charged emails exposes their deep attachment to specific outcomes, thereby weakening their leverage. Conversely, the individual who listens attentively, who nods judiciously, who speaks only when their contribution can decisively shift the entire discussion, that person commands a profound, silent respect. They are remembered not for the volume of their contributions, but for the precise, impactful nature of their interventions. In personal relationships, argument can tragically transform affection into rivalry, and genuine connection into territory that must be fiercely defended. Every word risks becoming ammunition, and every silence a tense battleground. But the person who refuses to be drawn into argument, who instead chooses to withdraw momentarily, recalibrate their internal state, and allow deliberate action or calm presence to speak louder than words, that person prevails not through emotional domination, but through superior emotional mastery and self-control, a key tenet of Stoic practice. As Seneca wrote, "The greatest power is the power over yourself." Genuine control is never about overpowering another individual. It is fundamentally about mastering yourself so thoroughly that no amount of external chaos or another person's emotional storm can succeed in drawing you into their turbulence. In the public sphere, the same pattern is evident. The individual who engages in constant arguments on social media platforms, who feels compelled to defend themselves against every minor slight, who wrestles publicly with every insult hurled their way, that person becomes predictable, diminished in stature, perceived as a figure driven by reaction rather than authority. But the individual who exercises restraint, who holds their tongue when provoked, who allows critics to shout into an indifferent void, and who trusts that time, underlying truth, and consistent action will ultimately serve as their defense, that person cultivates an aura of untouchability. They nurture mystery, arguably the rarest and most powerful form of authority in an age of oversharing. As Robert Greene reminds us in the 48 Laws of Power, mystique is seldom an accident, it is a strategically cultivated weapon. You must learn to discern the deeper pattern at play when someone attempts to draw you into an argument. They are not merely debating ideas or facts, they are attempting to bait you into their emotional frame, into a psychological quicksand where you lose your footing, your clarity, and your strategic advantage. If you take the bait and step in, you have, in a crucial sense, already lost, because they now dictate the emotional tone, the tempo of the interaction, and the treacherous terrain upon which the exchange takes place. But if you maintain your silence, if you observe the situation with a calm and disciplined mind, if you allow their desperate need to be right or to provoke you to expose their own underlying weakness, you achieve a victory without needing to engage in a struggle. Machiavelli, ever focused on practical outcomes, did not concern himself with abstract notions of fairness or justice in every interaction. He cared about demonstrable results. And in the realm of achieving desired results, engaging in arguments is consistently disastrous. They needlessly escalate minor tensions into prolonged, draining conflicts. They serve to harden opposition rather than soften it. They can transform potentially neutral parties into active adversaries. Worst of all, engaging in arguments volitionally exposes your emotional landscape to public view, effectively handing others the keys to understanding and manipulating your reactions. So, what is the alternative course of action? Instead of arguing, you observe meticulously. You listen intently, absorbing every detail but revealing little of your own inner state or intentions. You measure the contours of the situation with stoic patience and detachment. And when the moment is strategically right, you act, not with verbose explanations or defensive arguments, but with calm, decisive finality. You move cleanly, silently, without fanfare or unnecessary announcement. You allow others to fill the air with clamor and noise. You let them wear themselves down with their persistent need to be seen, to be validated, to be perceived as right. You, meanwhile, remain a steadfast fortress of internal stillness, calm, composed, profoundly centered. And when you eventually choose to speak, when you finally decide to make your move, your words are not scattered into the battle like tentative arrows. They fall, instead, with the impactful weight of a hammer blow, precise, definitive, undeniable. Their purpose is not to debate further, not to convince a resistant mind, but to effectively conclude the conversation or situation before it can degenerate into unproductive conflict. This approach embodies the ultimate Machiavellian strategic maneuver, grounded in the profound discipline advocated by the Stoics, the deliberate refusal to argue. To speak only when your words carry decisive weight and strategic purpose. To allow silence to communicate more powerfully and effectively than anger or frustration ever could. Because silence, unlike words, cannot be easily twisted, misquoted, or used as evidence against you. It floats above the chaotic fray, remaining untouched by the desperate need of others to be understood, acknowledged, or validated. As Epictetus reminds us, men are disturbed, not by things, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things. By refusing to argue, you demonstrate that you are not disturbed by the others' things, their words, their anger, but have mastered your own judgments and reactions. Ultimately, the person who truly understands and embodies this truth recognizes that their most potent weapon is not the strength of their argument, it is their cultivated indifference to the need to engage in one. And within that deliberate, strategic indifference lies an unassailable advantage that no amount of verbal force or contention can ever overcome. Refusing to argue, paradoxically, commands a deep and often grudging respect. Let us speak now of the often underestimated strength residing behind the deliberate refusal to argue, a form of power that both Niccolò Machiavelli, with his focus on worldly effectiveness, and the Stoics, with their emphasis on internal virtue and resilience, understood implicitly, but which few individuals possess the necessary discipline to wield effectively in today's reactive world. The true power of silence lies not merely in what it prevents, exposure, argument, wasted energy, but in what it actively creates. It establishes an open strategic field, a psychological vacuum where your chosen words, when they finally come, are not diluted by desperation or defensiveness, and where your sheer presence, quiet and controlled, grows heavier, more imposing, and more commanding. In a contemporary society where incessant noise is frequently mistaken for genuine relevance or authority, silence becomes the rarest, and therefore clearest, signal of authentic power and self-possession. Machiavelli, with his brutally honest appraisal of human nature, recognized this dynamic perfectly. Silence is not an absence of energy, it is a tension, a contained gravity. It draws people in, compels them to fill the void, to guess at what is withheld. Arguments, conversely, tend to push people away, they scatter your focus, broadcast your emotions, and reveal the very triggers that opponents can learn to use against you with devastating effect. When you engage in an argument, you voluntarily surrender your strategic advantage. But when you remain composed, when you speak minimally and act only when it carries maximum impact, you transform your silence into an invisible, potent force that subtly shapes the dynamics of the environment around you. Consider this in practical terms: the colleague who publicly challenges you, anticipating a defensive reaction. If you argue back heatedly, you legitimize their spectacle and grant their challenge undue weight. But if you maintain your composure, acknowledge only the objective core, if any, and calmly redirect the focus towards productive outcomes rather than personal emotions, you dismantle the potential conflict before it fully forms. You don't feel compelled to defend your ego because your presence is not there to perform or react. You are there to produce results or maintain your strategic position. And in that rare and striking composure, others are compelled to lean in. They listen more attentively. They begin to respect you, not for your debating prowess, but for what you resolutely refuse to engage with or explain unnecessarily. Or consider the emotionally volatile partner who lashes out, desperately seeking to pull you into a vortex of anger or drama. If you meet that storm with your own equivalent fury, you lose. You forfeit your frame of mind, your internal peace, your strength. But if you remain firmly grounded, speaking only the essentials when absolutely necessary, or perhaps choosing strategic silence until their emotional outburst expends itself, you retain your sovereignty. You don't win by overpowering their emotion, you win by steadfastly refusing to be dragged down into it. As the Stoics emphasized, your inner state is your own domain, impervious to external disturbance unless you permit it. Even on the modern battleground of social media, that vast public coliseum of instantaneous arguments and reactions, the same immutable principle applies. The instant you begin defensively engaging with petty criticisms or anonymous provocations, you hand over your authority to the lowest common denominator. You trade the substance of your presence for fleeting, draining participation in meaningless skirmishes. Machiavelli would remind you that those who constantly feel the need to explain or defend themselves have already lost standing in the eyes of a discerning audience. Silence in this digital arena is not a sign of defeat, it is a deliberate and powerful filter, meticulously separating what genuinely deserves your limited energy and attention from the overwhelming noise that does not. It transforms pointless provocation into irrelevant background static. But why is this so exceptionally difficult for most people? Because the ego whispers incessantly in our ear. The ego demands to be recognized. It demands to be perceived as right. It demands to have the final, definitive word in any exchange. And when we yield to these insistent demands, we are inevitably drawn into conflicts that are beneath our true stature, arguments that do not elevate us but rather diminish our presence and authority. A truly Machiavellian mind, however, does not indulge or feed its own ego in this manner. Instead, it strategically utilizes the ego, specifically, the ego of others. It observes patiently and analytically as others expose their own insecurities, their impatience, their profound need for external validation, all while it remains undisturbed, quietly accumulating invaluable information. Because every argument you successfully avoid engaging in provides you with priceless intelligence. The more the other person speaks, the more they inadvertently reveal their true intentions, their hidden weaknesses, their critical blind spots. And the more you maintain your silent reserve, the more you remain the unknown quantity, the unpredictable factor. And the unknown, the truly unreadable, is precisely what people fear the most in strategic interactions. Not necessarily because you are actively concealing something malicious, but because you have mastered the very thing, your own impulses, your own emotional reactions, that they themselves cannot even control within their own being. Here lies the profound paradox. The individual who consistently refuses to argue frequently ends up wielding the most persuasive form of power and influence. Why? Because strategic silence cannot be debated. Silence cannot be refuted with logic or emotion. An individual who doesn't engage in argument is not submitting to the other's view, they are observing, calculating, deliberately choosing their response. Their words, when they finally emerge, are few but carry significant weight, cutting through the surrounding noise with piercing precision. Their silence is not a passive retreat, it is artillery held deliberately in reserve, ready to strike with maximum impact only when it is strategically most advantageous. And Machiavelli apprehended an even darker, more pragmatic truth. When you engage in argument, you are, in essence, providing a free masterclass to your opponent on how to manipulate you in the future. Every defensive point you make, every subtle emotional slip you betray, offers them crucial insights into your psychological makeup, what you truly value, what you secretly fear, what triggers your predictable reactions. In the hands of a skilled adversary, this information becomes a formidable weapon to be exploited. But if they cannot provoke you, if your composure remains fundamentally intact despite their most persistent provocations, you deny them their most significant strategic advantage. You become unreadable, and the unreadable individual is frequently the most formidable presence in any strategic interaction. This principle does not imply that you should never speak at all. It means that you speak only when your words serve a clear, strategic purpose. The Machiavellian mind is not reactive, it is meticulously selective in its communication. And through that deliberate selectivity, it commands a level of respect and influence that cannot be begged for, demanded, or argued into existence. It must be felt and acknowledged implicitly by others. Consider how this unfolds in real-life scenarios. In personal conflicts, when individuals hurl accusations hoping to pull you down into the mud of their own emotional state, your unwavering calmness becomes their source of frustration. In debates or disagreements, when others resort to personal attacks or rhetorical aggression, and you respond not with defensive counterattacks but with calm clarity or profound silence, you often seize control of the dynamic of the room. In leadership during a crisis, when panic threatens to engulf the organization, the leader who refrains from over-explaining or justifying, but instead moves decisively and calmly without undue fanfare, becomes the stable pillar that others instinctually rely upon and rally behind. This is not abstract theory, this is the tangible method by which authentic influence and leadership are built and maintained. Even in the context of warfare, Sun Tzu, the master strategist, understood that the supreme art of war lies in subduing the enemy without needing to engage in direct combat. It is to achieve victory without argument, to defeat chaos not by mirroring its intensity, but by strategically transcending it through superior composure and control. This is Machiavellian warfare at its most refined, achieving psychological dominance without expending emotional or rhetorical energy. So, how do you consciously apply this principle in your everyday life? When challenged or provoked, pause deliberately. Take a deep breath. Allow the internal tension that might arise to exist for a moment without feeling the immediate need to release it through reactive words. Respond, if a response is absolutely necessary, with calm, concise, finite phrases such as, "You are certainly entitled to your perspective," or simply offer nothing at all. Let them wonder about your thoughts. Let them grapple with their own doubts. Let them speak themselves into a state of self-exposure and exhaustion. In digital environments like social media, exercise rigorous selectivity. Do not engage with every comment, every critic, every provocation unless the potential interaction serves a clear, beneficial long-term strategic vision. You are not obligated to expend your valuable energy addressing every detractor or responding to every baiting remark. Silence in this arena is not a sign of defeat or cowardice, it is a deliberate and intelligent filter, keeping you focused on your purpose and goals while others expend themselves drowning in the cacophony of online noise. In personal relationships, actively refuse to mirror or match emotional outbursts with your own. Resist the impulse to over-explain or justify yourself when unfairly attacked or misunderstood. Instead, deliberately slow the interaction down. Create space for reflection. Choose your response not from a place of reactive emotion, but from a place of cultivated internal command and self-possession, drawing on Stoic resilience. And in professional settings, your focus should not be on defending yourself or your decisions verbally, it should be on delivering tangible results. Allow your performance, your execution, the irrefutable proof of your competence to be the loudest and most persuasive voice in the room. Because here is the final, undeniable truth, a truth that resonates deeply with both Machiavellian strategy and Stoic philosophy. You do not need to win arguments when you have already won yourself. When your confidence is an internal, deeply rooted state, not dependent on external validation or approval. When your peace is anchored securely within you, rather than precariously hanging on the transient opinions of strangers. When your sense of intrinsic value is so profoundly rooted that no external insult, criticism, or challenge can possibly uproot it. That kind of individual, the one who does not flinch when provoked, who does not chase applause or external recognition, who does not feel compelled to argue simply to be seen or heard, that individual does not need to demand respect. Their very stillness, their quiet composure, inherently commands it. Ultimately, the greatest displays of power and influence are not found in shouting matches, rhetorical battles, or emotional confrontations. They are found in the individual who can remain calmly seated, outwardly unmoved, inwardly unprovoked, strategically undefeated, while the world around them erupts in clamor and conflict. The individual who masterfully refuses to argue wins crucial battles that most people never even perceive are being fought. They lead, not by demanding attention or compliance through force or argument, but by moving with a quiet, unwavering certainty that naturally draws others in. They influence, not by chasing external approval or validation, but by embodying a level of composure so steady, so self-contained, that others cannot help but orient themselves towards it and follow its lead. They do not fear being misunderstood. Because they comprehend something far deeper, that disciplined silence, that intentional reserve, speaks infinitely louder and strikes with far greater impact than 1,000 desperate, defensive words ever could. If this message resonated with you, consider subscribing to continue exploring these deeper insights into self-mastery and strategic presence. And as a quiet affirmation of the power you carry within, consider writing, "Stay silent," in the comments. Stay grounded. Stay patient. Stay untouchable. The next step on this journey will lead us even further into the profound art of mastering yourself in a world that incessantly demands your immediate reaction. And trust me, the journey is invaluable.